Hey, everybody, welcome to the next in our series of 90 Days of Digital Marketing. We are so excited to have Ryan Murray on with us tonight. We are going to kick off this webinar on podcasting for long-term growth. We'd like to thank our sponsors and funding by the U.S. Small Business Administration. We get our funding through a cooperative agreement between small business, the SBA, and Utah State University, and we are so grateful for that. I'm going to turn the time over to Ryan Murray. He's going to give you a little information on his background, and he's going to talk to you about how he built his podcast and how you can do that to help build your business for long-term growth. Ryan, take it away.
Sounds good. Before I get into too much, I'm going to do a screen share. I've got a couple notes that I'm going to pop up on the screen. So let's see if we can get that going through, and if I can grab this real quick. Okay. So looks like we're coming okay on my end. So hopefully we're good to go. My name is Ryan Murray. I am one of the hosts of the podcast Marketing, Management, and Money. It is a small business podcast that we've been doing for just over a year now. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that as I go throughout this presentation. It's going to be, kind of just more of a behind the scenes, pull back the curtain a little bit with my experience in podcasting and my experience with running a business that is complemented by my podcast. And so that's going to be the perspective that we're going to be talking from. If you are interested in anything that we do, so the podcast, as I mentioned, it's Marketing Management Money. You can reach out to me at ryan@marketingmanagementmoney.com. Conveniently, it's a show by Ryan Murray and Ryan Owens. And so we cheated and we just did the one email, ryan@marketingmanagementmoney.com. You can hit both of us up that way. But our show is going to be found on all the standard platforms, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Blueberry, etc. The one that is we're kind of excited about, we recently launched with TabletWise. This is an online learning platform. And so we've got, if you go to tabletwise.com, you can check out our training, Growth by the Numbers. This is our most popular financial training. When we do marketing, management, and money, this is the money side of it. And we've thrown in a promo code for anyone listening to this webinar. It's a BOSS that if you want to take advantage of that and jump on with that training, you are more than welcome to. And we'll talk about that a little bit. I threw that into this webinar to put a real life case study on a little bit going forward. So with that, we're going to go ahead and jump in. So I want to talk here about what it is that we're going to cover for the for the next about 60 minutes or so, and then we'll have some Q&A time as well. But this is really how to grow your business using a podcast, not how to create a successful podcasting business. And that's an important distinction that I want to make here, is that for me, when we got into podcasting, we did it primarily to support the existing business. So the company that I run, it's called Success Principles. We've been running this company now for, I believe, 6 years, if I do my math correctly. And we launched the podcast about a year and a half ago, and this was in an effort to help market the existing business. And so as I go through and I talk about some of the examples that I'm going to share, you got to look at it through that lens. And so if you're interested in just launching a podcasting business, you're going to follow different rules. You're going to play a different game. But if you're interested in, let's say that you do floral arrangements, or you do, maybe you're an attorney, or you're going to be a landscaper, or, whatever your business is. If you're looking at it and saying, okay, I'm trying to broaden my reach, I'm trying to get out there with my customers, I want to connect with them, then that's really the angle that we're going to be taking as we go through this. So just a little bit of background on me and my business. So Success Principles really started when I got into doing small business trainings. And I found that there was a need for small businesses to learn better how to run their business. I find that there's a lot of small businesses that they're experts in what they do. If they do computer repair, they're like, oh yeah, I can repair a computer, no problem. I can do all the upgrades. I'm really good with the technology. But that doesn't necessarily mean that they are solid with running a business. And so we found a little bit of a space there that we could set up a business, provide a lot of training programs, and a lot of presentations, do a lot of webinars, those kinds of things. And that's the core of the business. And so as we did that, originally, when I started the business, it was pretty much strictly in-person type of trainings. And I would go to where all of my customers were. And covering where I live. So, I live in Price, Utah, and it's super easy for me to get up to the Wasatch Front. Did a lot of stuff up in the Uinta Basin. Pretty much in the Utah area, it was easy for me to go and do trainings. But at one point, I realized that if I wanted to grow my business, I had to grow my market area, and so originally we looked at doing some interesting things. Like we did a trade show in Manhattan, and we were gonna branch out. I did some trainings up in Ohio. I've done some stuff down in Vegas, and so I was branching out, and I was looking at it, and I was realizing that didn't fit my business model very well. The problem is I wanted to stay focused on small businesses. And small businesses really are not the type of businesses they're going to drop $20,000 for a consultant to come out and work with them. And so when I was trying to go to these big cities across the United States, it was very difficult because I found that small businesses, whether you're in New York or whether you're in Utah, you tend to have some of the same struggles. And so, we realized very quickly that the travel expense, the amount of time it took to travel, the risk associated with travel, you're constantly going to these new markets, trying to establish yourself. It was very expensive. It was risky. It was difficult. There were a lot of problems. Now the travel was cool, but there were a lot of problems. And so we decided that we wanted to bring it into an online platform so that we could eliminate a lot of the travel associated with risk, a lot of risk associated with travel. Let me see if I can speak forward instead of backward. So as we were wanting to eliminate some of this risk, what we decided to do is we decided to go into podcasting. And the reason we went with podcasting is quite honestly, I don't like social media. I don't do well in social media. It's not in my nature. I've spent a lot of time studying social media. I've consulted people on social media. I've done presentations on social media. I find it ironic that I've actually presented on social media, and I'm not really an advocate of it myself. And so it wasn't the space that I wanted to be in. And so I wanted to find an alternative to social media, something that was more in line with me and my business. And that's where we looked at the podcasting. We launched the podcast. It meets our business goals. I've seen so much more growth with my podcast than I did with any of the social media efforts that I've done. If you took all of my social media combined, it doesn't come anywhere close to the value that I've gotten out of podcasting. And I'm going to talk about specifics as we go throughout this this webinar. But podcasting fit really well for me and my business. Now, maybe it fits for you, maybe it doesn't. We'll explore a little bit, and I'm going to just kind of pull back the curtain, as I said, show you some of the things that I did in podcasting that really made it work for me, and hopefully you can get a couple of gems that will make it work for you too. All right. So, why podcast? Parentheses, why do we podcast? So a lot of people, they do it to make money, duh. But one of the things that I found with podcasting that really changed my perspective on it is, first and foremost, I thoroughly enjoy it. It's just a lot of fun. And this is something that's kind of important to realize, that if you're going to get into this space, if you don't love it, it's not a good space to be in. I ran a blog for 3 years, and I didn't love it. It was tedious. It was homework. I always had to do homework. I'm like, oh, great, I got to get my next blog article out, and I think that kind of it 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 sort of spread to my customers because I didn't get a ton of engagement with my blog. And my heart wasn't in it. It wasn't the right space for me. Now, I know other people that they do great with blogging, and they don't like talking. They're like, oh, I would much rather just write my thoughts down on paper as opposed to have this conversation. And so, I look at it and I'm like, there's a lot to do with whether you enjoy what you're doing or not. Because if you enjoy it, your heart's going to be in it. You're going to be better at it. It's just a smart thing to do. So, I look at it and I'm like, okay, yes, we want to make money podcasting, but we also want to love what we're doing. Now, in making money, I'm going to break this down to two areas. You've got your direct and you've got your indirect. I'm going to talk a lot more about the indirect side of making money. I feel like most people go to that direct way of making money. They're just like, oh, okay, I want to sell ad space and I want to get sponsors and all these kinds of things. And I'm like, that's cool. But I'm going to ask this key question, and that is, do you have a following already? And I'm going to guess that the answer for most people listening right now is no, that they probably don't have a following. And when I say following, what am I talking about? I'm talking thousands, tens of thousands of people who are, this cult following of your podcast and what you do. Now, it doesn't have to be that you've got the following in the podcast. You might have a really strong Facebook following or Instagram following. I find that LinkedIn is probably not going to be as powerful in your podcasting. There is definitely some crossover that you can do, some cross promotion with LinkedIn. But when I say following, I'm looking at, like, in your social media, do you have a following already? As I already stated, social media is really not where I thrive. And so, no, I don't have a following. But on the podcast, yeah, I do. I can get that, and I can build that up. But the way that I make money is not direct. The way that I make money is through this indirect. And there are tons of ways to indirectly make money. And I'm going to talk about those indirect ways to make money on the podcast. Again, going back to this idea that I don't podcast to make money. I podcast to grow my business. My business makes the money. My podcast supports the business. And so that's very much an important philosophy that I have, is that I'm not looking at the podcast itself as a way to make money. I'm looking at the business as a way to make money, and the podcast supports the business. All right. I'm going to take the next couple of slides, and I'm just going to share with you what we went through. And, maybe you're the same, maybe you're different, but I'm going to share with you some of the process that we went through and some of the things that you're looking at if you are to engage in in a podcast. So for us to start up, it was under $2,000, and I put that we splurged a little bit because, honestly, I could have probably done it for about $500 if I wanted to. I wanted to make it a little bit nicer. If you're watching this, you can kind of see I angled the camera on purpose to show a little bit of where our studio is. Usually, I use the nicer backdrop if I'm doing a video recording, but I wanted to show a little bit of how the studio is. We took a room. It's in my house, and converted it into a recording studio. You can see the foam dampeners that we put on the wall, and we put a wood panel on the one side, and so we splurged a little to make it nice. But even at splurging, super cheap, not hard at all to get into starting a podcast. Cost to maintain. Costs us about $50 a month to maintain this. We pay a podcast hosting fee. We pay a website hosting fee. We download some images. There are little things here and there that they kind of add up. But again, in my mind, $50, it's cheap. Like, podcasting is not expensive to get going. Now, our cost to grow, no limit. This is where it really starts to get really pricey. If you're going to spend a lot of dollars to grow your podcast, then you can do as much as you want. There's no limit to how much you can spend. And so the question is how do we make the ROI on this? How do we make it make sense for us? And again, it goes back to that whole concept of my business already makes money for me. If my business is making money for me, my podcast just needs to support my business. And that's how I determine my ROI is I look at the business and I want to make sure that the business is growing, and I want to make sure that the podcast is supporting that. So jumping down to the time that we do. So we started planning in May and we launched in September. So, it took us, what is that, about 4 months, 5 months, something like that. And I put in parentheses, we were a little slow. I could have done it faster. That was not a very aggressive pace. You could launch a podcast in a week if you really wanted to. One of the things that we started out with is we made a list of different topics that we could cover. And I told myself, so we started with a weekly podcast. And so I decided that I needed 50 topics outlined before I would even start recording my first one. And if I couldn't come up with 50 topics, in my mind, that's a year's worth of content. If I couldn't come up with 50 topics, I didn't have enough content to justify doing a podcast. And so that was my own threshold that I put in place. I was surprised to find out how quickly and easily we came up with 50 topics. In fact, to this day, so we've been doing the podcast now for, just over a year. And I haven't gone through all 50 of those initial topics because we keep thinking of new topics to cover. And so plenty of content put us in a good spot. So that was the first step that we did. The second step that we did is we practiced recording. That actually took a lot of time. It was difficult to get used to talking into a microphone. And it took us a little while. So, I've got a co-host that does the show with me. My opinion, co-hosts make it a whole lot easier because you don't have to talk the entire time. If you have to talk the entire time, you better make sure that you are capable of doing that, because that's not an easy task to do. And so having a co-host, it gives you a chance to pause, to collect your thoughts while they're talking. You can be, pulling up some data to complement your show or whatever the case may be. And so it took us a while to learn a balance of not talking over each other, when to ask questions, when someone was wrapping up a thought or ramping up a thought. And so we practiced quite a bit. And those first few practice recordings were garbage. I mean, I listened to them. They were super boring. I made my wife listen to them and she's like, do I have to finish this? I mean, it was painful for her to have to listen to what we were talking about. And we realized that just talking and then talking into a microphone were two different things. So my business, I do a lot of live trainings. And that's where I got all my experience, was doing these live trainings. I love sitting in front of 100 small business owners and feeling the energy of the room and being able to kind of feed on that energy and play with the audience a little bit and get them engaged. And I loved that. And so when I got in front of a microphone, it's like right now I'm on this webinar and I'm just talking and I have to, in my mind, imagine the audience that is listening to me. And I still have to engage with that audience, but I have to do it without the immediate feedback of seeing their reactions and knowing what their experience is like on the other end. And that took us a lot of practice. And so those were some of the reasons why we started in May, didn't launch until September, is because we took some time to practice, to refine, to get it down until we had a sound that we liked. Once we had a sound that we liked, then we were ready to go. Now, this next piece, this ratio, this 3-to-1 ratio, I think this is super important for any podcaster to understand. And this is the ratio of how long does it take us to produce an episode. And right now, it takes us 3 times as long to produce the episode as the episode is long. So we do about 20, 25-minute episodes, and it takes us about an hour and 15 minutes to do the production cycle. That is the pre-planning, that is the recording, that is the editing, and that is, uploading and posting it online. And so we're at about a 3-to-1 ratio, which is very efficient. I've talked to some other people and, I've seen ratios that are much, much higher than a 3-to-1. But you got to think about that. If you're going to produce an hour of content and you're at a 5-to-1 ratio, do you have 5 hours where you can edit that, where you can, go through and plan your outline and all these things? And so we try and keep ours to a nice tight ratio, a 3-to-1. I find that anything tighter than that, we start to get a little bit sloppy, mainly in our edits. Editing just takes a long time. We also don't transcribe our podcast. We've looked into it. I would love to transcribe our podcast. I just haven't found a good way to do it. We have a software that does it for us. It's not great. With all of the AI technology that is out there, the transcribe process still is not ideal. And so we haven't done transcribing with our podcast. I'll tell you, if you transcribe it, it is a great way to add listeners because you expand your audience a lot. So then you've got the time spent networking and marketing. Never enough. And this is just true with any business. You always feel like you could be doing more in your business. And this is really where I spend the majority of my time with my podcast. It's not in the content creation. It's not in, producing the podcast or anything like that. It's in trying to network with other podcasters. It's in trying to grow the podcast. It's in trying to leverage the podcast to actually make some money off of it. And it's time consuming. One of the things that's been a little bit nice is that we've gotten it to the point that we sort of get out of it what we put into it. And so if we put more time into it, we kind of see, we see the benefits of, the fruits of our labor coming up with the amount of time that we put into it. And that's nice. The disadvantage of that is I feel like I am restricted because I'm a human being. I still want to spend time with my family. I still want to enjoy hobbies. I enjoy sleeping occasionally. And so, I want to spend time being a human being and not spend all of my time just dedicated strictly to, my podcast. And so, I'll probably put in, 5 to 10 hours a week, all told, between networking, marketing, pushing it, so about 5 to 10 hours a week is spent on that podcast piece. Okay, what do we use? This is just some information. I am not endorsing anything. I'm just telling you, this is where we come from. So our podcast hosting, we use Blueberry. We've been pleased with them. They've done just fine. There's dozens of options out there. The website is WordPress. One of the reasons why we went with Blueberry is because it integrates very well into WordPress, and we liked that. The mics and the mixer, they both come from Rode. I honestly do think that when it comes to microphones, Rode is going to have some of your best podcasting microphones out there for the dollar. Like, you can get some very expensive podcasting microphones. They're going to be $800 plus. The ones that we got, I think they were about a couple $100 a piece, and the quality has been really nice. And so we've enjoyed that. Sound foam, yes. I don't remember who we got it from, but I highly recommend it. But none of these are requirements. I mean, you can record into anything that will take your voice and make a simple podcast. It still works. People still like it, but it is nice to have that quality sound so that people don't struggle to hear what's going on. Audrey.io. IO is, I believe, just the British version of .com. Not totally positive on that, but I know that they're out of Great Britain, this company, Audrey. I wish I would have started using this a year ago. They've got some pretty amazing free services. You can go and you can collaborate with other podcasters. You can see some downloads of other podcasters, how they're doing. It's really, really beneficial. I've enjoyed it quite a bit. Script. Do we use a script? Nope. We tried it. I didn't like it. Here's the problem with the script. It took a really long time to write that script up. And then it just made the show super boring because we were reading the whole time and you could tell it. It was just, it was painful. And so I recommend against scripts. Now, what about note cards or cue cards? We don't use them. We tried them as well. They were so much better than the script. And at first, we kind of needed these cue cards to keep us on track and to help us, get the feel of it. it was amazing that after recording our first half a dozen, we don't need cue cards anymore. We've got the feel of each other. We know how to communicate well on the show. And so it took a good half a dozen recordings to to kind of get that. But personally, I like the free flow of communication. I think it makes for a much more interesting show, and so that would be my recommendation. Now, what about this? As many templates as possible. We want to streamline. This goes back to that 3-to-1 ratio. We want to streamline everything that we can. And so we looked at the upload process to our website and we created a template. Like there is a specific process that we go through. On the editing, there's a specific process that we go through. On the branding, we got our theme music and we went ahead and just, put that in its own file. We got all of the branding, the colors, the logos, everything was put into one file. And, we've got, we use stock photography for all of the covers of our podcasts. And so, we've got our stock photography account and we've got all the notes, and we make sure that we use the same title in the notes, in the podcast, on the website. It's a copy paste. And so anywhere that you can just create some sort of template is going to be just the best way to make sure that that you are streamlining your process and you're not wasting a lot of time, because time is the enemy of content. If you can't do this quickly and efficiently, you're going to burn out. And so I love to build those templates and put those in. What about video? There are a lot of podcasts you can get on YouTube, and you can find a ton of podcasts. All of your big podcasts pretty much have a video. Do I recommend it? Absolutely, if you have the bandwidth. We found that adding video to our podcast made it so much more difficult to produce. The amount of time that you add with video was just significantly higher than the amount of time to just do an audio recording. And so we're still exploring different ways that we can effectively produce video. I mean, we've got a lot of video content that we've produced, but we're trying to figure out how to effectively produce it and keep those ratios down of how much time we spend for every 20 minutes of content created. And so on the video, that's something that you need to have a plan for video. You need to have some video. Maybe not every single podcast recording, but you need to have some video. That's just the way that technology goes. The most popular ones have video to them. It's a smart way to go. All right, these are the things that I wish that I would have known up front, that I kind of learned along the way, that maybe by sharing with you guys, that will help you to avoid some of the mistakes, or to get you on the road faster. The first one, downloads versus subscribers. When I first started podcasting, I was going for subscribers, and now going for subscribers is a great thing to do. I didn't understand what a download meant. And when you start looking at metrics, a lot of times they'll use the download metric versus the subscriber metric. And so you need to familiarize yourself with what exactly a download is, some of the pros and cons of downloads. Someone can download your episode and not really listen to it. Someone can also subscribe to your episode and not listen to it, or subscribe to your podcast and not listen to it. And so you're trying to figure out how engaged is your audience. And if that's one of your goals, if having audience engagement is a high priority for you, then you need to understand what exactly is going on with your metrics. I find that the metrics are difficult to come by. For those of you who do any web development and you're familiar with platforms such as Google Analytics, you get into Google Analytics and you look at it and you're just like, wow, I've got tons of information. I mean, you can find out like when someone's birthday is that got onto your website. Not really, but pretty close to, right? There's tons of information. Same thing if you're in that social media space. Like you can get on and you can see a lot of metrics. I've worked with businesses that, they'll sell on platforms like Amazon or Etsy or eBay. Again, tons of metrics, tons of analytics. when I got into this podcasting world, I was shocked to see that the analytics were difficult to come by. There were some inconsistencies. There was a lot of discrepancies. There was a lot of open to interpretation, and it was difficult. And so up front, I think you should educate yourself on what metrics to care about. We definitely look at downloads. One of the things that I wish that I would have measured a lot more upfront was where my international audience is coming from. Also, how much engagement you have from repeat listeners. And so there are a lot of things. I keep a separate spreadsheet outside of my analytics where I'll take some key data, I'll plug it into the spreadsheet, and I track our podcast growth that way. So anyway, the next one, everyone listened to our intro episode. Now, here's the funny thing. When we recorded our intro episode, it was right at the beginning. We were still figuring things out. We weren't that polished. I wasn't pleased with it. And I'm just like, whatever. It's an intro episode. Like, to me, I don't really care that much about, introductory episodes. I want to get into the meat of it. But by far, our intro episode has the most downloads of any of our episodes. Now, part of that is it came out first, so it's got the most time of any of the episodes. But I find that what happens is when people go to your podcast, they'll listen to the intro, and if they like the intro, then they'll listen to some of the episodes. And so make sure you have a good intro episode. I went back and listened to our intro episode. It's not as bad as I originally thought it was. It's actually pretty enjoyable to listen to, but I wish that we would have made it that much more over the top. If I would have understood how many people would have been listening to that one, I probably would have taken a little bit more time, made just a home run intro episode as opposed to, it's a good episode, So on the show format, currently we're a weekly episode that is about 25 minutes. We're going to give that a facelift starting in 2021. And, I've started doing a little bit of research here. The weekly podcast is not difficult to maintain. We pre-record ours. We like to be a month ahead. And I find that it's not that bad, even with a busy schedule, even with still running a business on top of that. And, in my day life, I oversee the sales marketing department for one of the local companies. And so, I'm a busy guy. It wasn't that hard to stay ahead of the weekly schedule. But one of the things that I'm finding is we're struggling with this balance of, trending news versus evergreen content, trying to schedule with interviewers and trying to get them on the show in a time frame that makes sense with them. We're pre-recording a whole bunch of content, but if something exciting, breaks in the news between the time that we pre-recorded, it's hard to tuck stuff in. And the other thing that, as I was networking with another podcaster, they pointed out, they said, there's a lot of listen fatigue that happens with your listeners. And I'm like, what do you mean? He said, well, as you look at what listeners want to, connect with, the way that podcasters usually consume content is they'll binge. So they'll binge and then they'll bounce, and then they'll binge and then they'll bounce. And I'm like, yeah, I've seen that. I've seen that in our analytics. And he said, well, so what you want to do is you want to have that steady stream of content coming out, but you also want to have these little teasers. If you want to run a promo for your business, you want to be able to do that. And so what we're going to do is we're going to keep we're going to move to a bi-monthly, so twice a month, we're going to put an episode out instead of 4 or 5 times a month, right? And then that's going to be our scheduled content. And then we're going to throw in interviews on top of that. We're going to throw in, quick tips on top of that, promos on top of that. And so there'll constantly be all these updates that are happening, but they're going to be a little bit sporadic. And so we're going to try and engage our audience a little bit more by being like, hey, did you see this new thing? But we can also keep the steady growth by having that consistent schedule going out. So we're going to get a little bit more refined, more sophisticated in the way that that we're going to do our podcast show. But there's nothing wrong with weekly. We've been doing weekly for a little over a year. We've seen steady growth with our podcast, and it's been great. One of those steady growth areas is international. I was shocked to see how many people internationally were tuning in to our podcast. That is the fastest growing segment. And it really, so when we started, so right at first you start your podcast and you're just telling your friends and family, you're like, Mom, please listen. Right. And then it grows and you start to expand, and that was good. When we started expanding, our international audience was about 10% of our audience. Today, our international audience is well over 30% of our audience. And that kind of surprised me. But in looking at it, the United States is not the most populous country in the world. And there are a lot of there's 7 billion people on this planet, and only 300 million of them live in the United States. So expect to have a lot of international. One of the areas that we have a lot of listeners coming from is Africa. And so we sort of made a shift a few months ago to make our podcast more international friendly. We started thinking, okay, how can I sell to these people? Also, instead of making every single example something that is only relevant to rural Utah, we're like, well, let's broaden our focus. And so we try to incorporate examples that bring in stuff that is more internationally recognized and understood. Now, I do want to point out that we keep it in English, and that has not been a deterrent. One of the people that I networked with, they are German. They have a podcast in Germany, and they do the whole podcast in English. And so if you think about the power of English, in podcasting, like that's the language that you want to be in. And so you're not going to have any problems going international. It's going to happen naturally if you have good content. So the other thing, I wish we would have been doing guests from the beginning. I don't know why we waited so long to do guests. Well, I do know why we waited so long, because it takes a while to coordinate and organize your interviews. I think that's something I should have done in the planning on the front end, because we put in there that we were going to have some guests, but we never put any planning around it. And it wasn't until recently that we started introducing guests into the podcast, and I love it. It's a whole lot more fun because we get to talk with really interesting people, and we get to share off of their audience. And so, introducing guests early on, absolutely the way to go. Okay, a few stats. Based on what I have found, I will give a disclaimer right now. These are not well-vetted stats. This is just my personal experience and things that I have noticed. So please do not hold me, hold my feet to the fire that you're like, well, it was actually, 87%. I'm like, I'm just telling you the experience that I've had. So Audrey.io shares download ranges of their network, and the majority, seems like 90% plus to me, are between 1 to 500 downloads per show. Basically, here's the short of, and then this second one. 50% of all podcasts have fewer than 136 downloads per episode within the first 90 days. The point that I'm getting at is that the vast majority of podcasts are not going to have a ton of downloads. Now, if you're trying to run a podcast company, like if the podcast is your business, then you're not going to make it on these types of numbers. If the podcast is complementing your business, you can make great money. When we got our first contract off of our podcast, I think we were only getting, like 30 downloads an episode or something. It wasn't this huge number, and we were able to already get a contract off of it. And so, as we grow and we get more contracts and we get more business, and I'll show you, I've got a slide here that's going to talk about exactly where we get our money from. But you don't need to have huge numbers to make money on your podcast, or to have your podcast make money for your business. Again, I keep going back to that because that's how it works. If you're trying to make money on your podcast, you do have to have the numbers. If you don't have 1,000 people that are downloading every single episode, then you don't have enough to go off of to make money solely on the podcast. And that's a tough number to reach. I mean, if you think about that, that's really a tough number to reach. That's not saying that 1,000 people have tuned in. That's saying 1,000 people tune in every single episode. So literally hundreds of new podcasts are launched every day and growing. There's a lot of competition out there. So think about what is it that you bring to the table? One of the best things that you can bring to the table, first off, you're not going to have any original content. I guarantee that someone somewhere on the face of the earth has said it, written it in a book, posted it on Facebook. It's already been done before. Don't get hung up on that. Don't think that you have to be super creative and super original. What you have to be is authentic. You have to be you. Talk about what your business does. Talk about why your business cares. Talk about what's important to your business. Get passionate about it. People, they're not looking for truly original content. They're looking for people who are passionate about their content and can present it in an entertaining, original way. That's what they're looking for. And so, when you're out there and realizing that you're competing against all of these other podcasts, why is someone going to want to tune into you? What is it about you that makes it interesting that they're going to love and trust and give you their time? So this is an interesting one. My Apple Podcast stats and my Blueberry stats never match. I reached out to Blueberry and I asked them what this was. They said that they use a more sophisticated, analytics, and it seems to be true. I've kind of looked at that. There are some third-party sources that do state that Blueberry's analytics are some of the better analytics out there. One of the things that's interesting about Apple is on Apple Podcasts, in order to be tracked in their stats, you have to set up your Apple Podcast station to allow tracking. And so there are a lot of people that are listening via Apple Podcasts that don't allow tracking. And so unless you've got, as soon as you start to get into really big numbers, that's going to become more accurate. But with the smaller numbers, you're going to struggle to get those to match with your regular analytics. And so I don't really use my Apple Podcast stats very much just because I look at them. I'll look at them about once a week and just kind of see what's going on. But they're very different from my Blueberry stats. Okay, so I want to talk about how we make money with our show. First and foremost, you need a product to sell. Don't rely on your show alone to make money. You've got to have something that can sell. It's going to be easier if that thing can sell via online. That really helps a lot. It doesn't have to be that way. But think about your podcast audience. Like our audience in Utah was the biggest audience when we started. Today, Utah, last I checked, they were ranking about number 3 in terms of where our listenership is coming from. Right now, we have more people that are engaging with us in Kentucky than we are in Utah. Why? I don't know. I am not sure why Kentucky is more interested in us than Utah, but you'll see that it's going to branch beyond your geographical reach. And so you need to have something that you can sell to these people and that has to make sense for them to buy. And so think about your services. I was on a call, a networking call. I connected with an attorney who does a podcast. And what he had done is he had put together an online program where he could outsource some of the legal services used for small businesses. And it made sense. He was out of Tennessee, but he could service businesses anywhere in the United States. I didn't ask him if he serviced it international, but he could service businesses anywhere in the United States. So don't get hung up thinking, well, okay, I'm just down in rural Utah. I don't know, I don't know how I could sell anything. I'm like, when I learned that farmers are shipping hay to China that they grow in Utah, I'm like, if you can sell hay to China, you can sell anything anywhere in the world. So don't limit yourself in your thinking to, well, my business is only local. There is a lot that you can sell, including expertise. You might have like a store, like maybe you've got a restaurant and you're like, well, you know what? I'm not going to ship my pizza to North Dakota because it'll be disgusting by the time it shows up. That's true. But do you have some expertise that you've been making, artisan pizzas for the last 12 years and you've got a lot of information that you can share? Could you sell some of that? Could you make an ebook out of that or a training out of that or something like that? So there are a lot of options that you can do. All right. This is how we've made money. Using our show to promote our training. So we've used our podcast to promote the training that you pay for. Podcast is free, training costs money. So this is an example of some of the things that we do, and it is a shameless plug. You can go to tabletwise.com and search Growth by the Numbers. Use promo code BOSS before the end of the year to get the training for $97, regularly $297. So what I'm doing here is I am taking the opportunity to say, hey, by the way, I sell stuff, and this is one of the things that I sell, and I'm going to give you guys a promo so that you can go in, you can check it out, you can buy it. All right. This has worked really well for us. I highly recommend that you look at doing similar things with your podcasts. Using our show to get presenting opportunities. One of the challenges that I had, so when I was flying back to New York and flying back to Ohio, back in the days when people could get on airplanes and travel, I guess. But when I was traveling, there was always a risk. And people would ask me, I'd have to send them like a video clip of me presenting, and they would kind of vet me and determine whether I was going to be what they wanted for their conference. And there was always this risk, and it was a very difficult hurdle to get past. Well, now, anytime that anyone's interested in working with me, I can just tell them, I'm like, yeah, you can check out my work on the podcast. And they're like, great. And boom, done. And so, I've used the podcast. It's added a lot of credibility. It's added a lot of speaking opportunities and presenting opportunities. And so I've loved it for that. We've used our show to network with professionals. I've referenced several times that, that I've been networking with, the guy in Germany, the attorney. Those were some that I just recently did the past week or two. And it's been nice. I can get in with like-minded professionals. I've got people reaching out to me today, or all the time. Today, I got one reaching out to me. That's what I meant to say. So they're reaching out to me, and these people, they want to cross promote. And so now all of a sudden I have people who are willing to sell my product just because I podcast. And I love it because I, in turn, am willing to help them grow their audience or sell their product or whatever the case may be. And so, this networking cross promotion has been an excellent way for me to grow my business using my podcast. So use the show for credibility to get contracts. I recently was able to land a pretty sizable contract. It was quite nice. It was big enough. So when COVID hit, we actually lost business. I do a lot of in-person trainings, and you can imagine that in-person trainings are not super popular in the year 2020. And so all of the in-person trainings that I had lined up all got canceled. COVID hit in about March. That's when things really started shutting down. March, April, May, June are all really good months for me to do live trainings. The spring is an excellent time to do live trainings. So I had all these live trainings lined up and they got canceled. And I was looking at it and I'm like, I'm probably going to take a loss this year. Well, not a loss, but I was definitely going to be down from previous years. And, so anyway, we were able to, and we leveraged our podcast as one of the ways to do this. We were able to get a really nice contract to do, some online trainings. And it actually was a big enough contract that it made up for all of the lost revenue that I lost for all those in-person trainings. And I thought to myself, I'm like, that is wonderful. I was super excited for it. But one of the reasons I got it was because I had plenty of content to show them. When they came in and they're like, okay, we're looking for someone who can do some online trainings, but we need someone who's going to be good at it. And I'm like, well, you can see from my podcast that I have expertise in this. Now, you don't have to be, you're like, well, you do trainings. That makes sense. Podcasts and trainings, they go hand in hand. I'm like, well, okay, what if you are a car repair center? If you have a podcast that shows your level of expertise, you still can gain credibility when people are like, well, who do you take your car to? Well, I take it to these guys. Have you ever listened to their show? Like, they know their stuff. These aren't just your typical grease monkeys. They're people who know what they're doing. And so I trust them with my vehicle. And that's one way that we've managed to grow our business is by improving our credibility. And then this has been an interesting one. We actually have used our studio a couple times to do other voice recordings for other companies. So this is not a direct one. This is an indirect one. I threw it in there because we've made money doing it. Just doing. There was one that we did a commercial for. They kept recording it themselves. The sound quality was pretty poor. And they knew that we had a podcast. And so they're just like, hey, can we use your recording or your recording studio? I'm like, absolutely. And so they came over and did their recording, got the sound quality that they wanted. And, it was good business all around. Okay. What is a good podcast? So these are questions that I ask myself all the time. And if I can't answer yes, then for me, it's a no deal. Like if I'm going to keep going with my podcast, then I've got to make sure that I can, that I can answer affirmatively to these things. First one, do I enjoy it? I already talked to you about, I was doing the blog. I didn't enjoy it. Man, when I stopped doing the blog, I was so happy to not have to do that anymore. I don't enjoy social media very much. I love podcasting. It's just fun. And so, that's important. Is it growing? Yes. I look at it, and a lot of times people get hung up on the numbers, and they're just like, well, I'm not as good as these other podcasts. And I'm just like, don't compare yourself at an absolute. Compare yourself and say, am I growing? Is my audience increasing? If your audience is consistently increasing, it means that people appreciate the content you are producing. And so as we continue to grow, I look at that as a huge indication that there is value in the podcast that we produce. All right. Does it support my core business and is not a distraction? This one is kind of interesting because I've seen where businesses, they get so caught up in these marketing efforts. They start running heavy social media. They start doing all these videos. They start doing a podcast. And before you know it, they're completely off base of what their core business is. And so you want to make sure that the podcast is it's a support, not a distraction, and keep yourself in check, because again, I enjoy it so much that it's easy for me to just want to record. I'm like, ooh, let's do more recordings. But we try and keep it balanced and say, okay, how much time are we going to spend, actually doing the dirty work that is like, I don't want to do that, but it's good for the business, And do I have enough content to keep going? That's super important, because if you run out of content, you run out of your show. And if you're just regurgitating the same things over and over and over again, a podcast really is not the way to go. My opinion is, if you want to see growth with your podcast, I think weekly is about the right number. I have seen podcasts that they do a little bit less than weekly, but if you're not putting something out there on a regular basis, then you're not going to grow your audience. And so, how much content do you have? A great way to get around that content dilemma is to interview people. And, I showed some of those resources. Like I use Audrey to find people to interview. I've also used Twitter to find people to interview. And so there are different ways that, and then as you grow, you'll have people reach out to you. That's one that's working well for us. Okay, with that, I think that we hit about our hour mark. I guess I'm a little early. 5 minutes before the hour mark, but I was told we're going to do about 60 minutes of presentation, and then we're going to open it up for any questions that anyone has.
Of course, Strike Buddy would be the first one to have questions every night. I love it.
I just felt like it was a little bit of Jeopardy style. I just wanted to hit that button real quick. I had it ready on that unmute button, so I was good to go. I really don't have any questions. It's a little bit snowing out here, and my kids showed up. They like to play games, so I was cutting in and out for a minute, and I probably still am. I apologize for that, and that's one of my problems about doing live streaming podcasts, and I'm trying to get myself set up over here, and I'm sure with all this fight news that's been going around, I'm sure I got plenty of content to possibly talk about.
Yeah, it's interesting where you said with your kids coming in and out. That was one thing that we struggled with a little bit, because being dead honest, I put my studio in my house, and I've got kids. They like to do kid things, and those aren't always quiet and contained. And so, first off, I think that society realizes that people are working from home right now, and you might hear a dog bark, and it's still okay. You can still run a show. I wouldn't let that be a deterrent. And again, authenticity, just keep it real.
Yeah, all day.
Love it.
I think the authenticity about it almost makes it that people like it more, because they realize that, hey, I could do that, or I relate more to that. I have a kid at home. I have a dog at home. That's something that would happen to me. So don't let that stop you.
So an interesting thing that we had happen to us when we were first doing the podcast, my co-host Ryan, he comes to the table with a really strong marketing background, but he's not great at finance. And we would do these finance episodes, and he felt like he had to not come across as not knowing what he was doing. And so he would try and put on this air of like, oh yeah, like I know exactly what you're doing. And we looked at that and we're like, you know what, just be real. Like, I don't think that there's anything wrong with admitting. He's like, look, I'm really strong in marketing. I'm really strong in management. I'm not strong on the finance side of things, but you are. And so that's why we're co-hosting this. And so we tried to go a little bit more open and honest. And the feedback that we've gotten from people that have listened is very positive, in that they prefer the open, honest approach.
Yeah, I cannot listen to fake people.
Yeah, I think we're all a little burned out on that.
So funny story about the open and honest. So I did a podcast called Wine and Wealth Wednesdays. And when we recorded, we'd always go live on our Facebook page for our firm. And we got more views on our live because we would be so the conversation would be so open and honest, and we would get so authentic. They would enjoy that conversation more than the actual upload podcast, because we would get so live and honest and authentic. That's why I'm all about, being authentic and showing, the truth. Either you like that, you don't like that. This is what true life is. This is the way it is. Because that's what people want. People want to know that's what it looks like.
Yeah. I think another interesting thing is, you've got the authenticity, but also when you're being authentic, you're being more natural and you're more enjoyable to listen to. One of the things that we struggled with initially was trying to get that right voice of not being super excited and I'm here to just talk to you about everything. I mean, it's like, oh, he's off. But then you also don't want to be this guy who's talking to you and telling you that I'm going to, it was this balance. And the only way that we were able to find that balance was by being ourselves and being able to laugh a little bit, joke around a little bit, have some fun. And there were some tangents, like on our show, we're going to get on a few tangents, but it makes it real. And that way we're able to keep the energy up without being over the top, and so those are some things, again, in that planning stage, like just just practice. Make your friends listen to it, and if your friends aren't enjoying it, then strangers will hate it.
Definitely.
That's why I target market a little bit. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Those hashtags. Gotta know your audience. You know?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so that's what I go for.
Goes back to the beginning where we looked at your the ideal client and who you really want to hit, the stories behind them, and then that will also help direct your conversation and your podcast. Carrie and Shane, you're quiet tonight. Do you have anything to add or to share, or any questions?
No, Shane was late to the game, and I'm actually trying to watch my granddaughter's basketball game kind of at the same time. So no, I don't, but I appreciate the information.
Awesome.
Well, and one thing that we found with the podcast, as you're talking about, you're trying to watch your granddaughter's basketball game. Man, our customers, they're real people. And, we have found that by having content out there that they can consume on their time makes a lot of sense. When we were trying to do the live trainings, everyone had to be at the same place at the same time. And I'm like, that's just not the way people live today. And so, whether you're going to podcast or not, obviously I'm passionate about podcasting, but if you're looking at some other type of marketing, still get at the level of your customers. If they're busy, understand that they're busy. This session, I think, Megan, you're being smart. You're recording it and you're like, look, we had to adjust the time on this a little bit, and that impacted when people could jump on board. And so, we're recording it, letting them listen to it at their level, and understanding the customer's needs. Beautiful. Love it.
Yeah. Well, that's something that's so important, and we've learned to be flexible, just like you said. This how-to series, 90-day how-to series, we almost have 100 people registered for the series, and most people don't even know that. They get on live every single week, and they rely on that because we do the replay, just like you said. Life happens. Thursday night's basketball night, just like Carrie said. And so the replay is so important, and that's the cool part, is you're flexible, and that's the cool part about podcasts. You can listen to them while you're cleaning the kitchen, or you're working out in the garage, or whatever that might be, and to be able to do that, and you're reaching a whole new audience, and building that audience with your business, especially for us that are in these small town rural communities, and we want to reach out. Ryan talked about how most of his audience, it started in Utah, but now he's reaching out all over the place. How cool would that be to expose your business all over the place just by sharing your information? So that's why I talk about, when you're building your podcast, it's about long-term growth, because it really expands and gives you opportunity for long-term growth.
Yeah, it was a few months before we saw anything. And even right at first, you'd see blips here and there. And you're like, oh, hey, I actually got some business off of this. And now that we've been at it for a little while, it's coming in more steadily. And so it's a long-term focus. For us, we've got a 3-year plan on our podcast. We're going to give this 3 years and do an evaluation. That doesn't mean we're going to stop in 3 years. It just means that we're going to evaluate at the end of 3 years, but we're not going shorter than 3 years. And so, we put a growth plan, a long-term growth plan for our podcast. It was amazing. Once we started having like 30, 40, 50 episodes, our download rate went up substantially, because 1, people trusted us more, and 2, if they liked the podcast, there were enough episodes that they could jump in on. When we only had like 8 episodes, you had to really like the podcast to want to jump in and get connected to it.
Definitely. So I'm thinking of something while we're talking here, since you're on and you've got a little more experience than I do with podcasting. So when I started podcasting, I did a lot of research, and one of the people that I talked to, and we followed this advice, is that he told us to record multiple seasons of your podcast, and then release 3 or 4 episodes, and then a week later release the rest of the seasons, because just like you said, they binge on podcasts, and then a month later drop another season in the same method. And we found that very successful. How do you feel about something like that?
So I actually agree with that. It goes back to what are your goals of the podcast? If your goals are to increase listenership, then you need to engage in a strategy like that. And one of the mistakes, as I pointed out in the slides, that I wish that we would have thought about a little bit more was the schedule. We just went with the weekly schedule and we're like, okay, episode 1, episode 2. And, like who's going to listen to, I've got 2 crappy episodes and I got to wait a week if I even like this show. And so for the first month, we got nothing, I got curiosity seekers of people that I knew that were just like, let's see if he's any good. And that was our audience. It was not an authentic audience. And so, dropping some content so that they can binge. Oh, I wish I would have thought that on the front end. And so, I appreciate that you gave me the the flattery of like, oh, well, you've got more experience than this, but let me tell you something that you should have done and get your opinion on it. Yeah, I should have done it. So like there's definitely something to be had about making sure that you've got enough content for someone to get into. And so if I was starting a brand new podcast with no following, no content, I probably would drop, a dozen episodes right off the bat, and then, and then actually start doing like my weekly or my monthly or whatever I'm going to do.
Something that we liked about doing that schedule is that allowed us to record 3 or 4 episodes a week or in a day, because we only were doing, like I said, we were doing 20 minutes, but it only took us an hour to record it, record the content, and then we could go back and edit it. But then we had all of this recorded, and so we weren't recording constantly, which a lot of people feel like they're doing. So we could schedule a Saturday that wasn't busy or a Monday or whatever and do a bunch of recording. And then as we had time, do the editing for it and have it ready to drop. So
yeah,
that was
we get a month done in about 1 or 2 days. That's about how we do it. And, and we just plan to work. Like our favorite time to start is about 10 o'clock at night. And we'll go till about 2 a.m. just recording because it's quiet in the house.
Yep. Business owners tend to be night owls for some reason. And the 10 to 2 is our window. There's we have the Miracle Morning book that's out there that everyone talks about. We need to do a 10 to 2, some type of book about 10 to 2 and what happens, how much work gets done between those hours.
I was going to say that 4-hour work week, it's going to be the midnight 4-hour work week. You can write the book. That'll be the follow-up to that book.
Yep. Seriously. Well, absolutely awesome. I so appreciate your time tonight, Ryan. This has been absolutely incredible. Because of the time shift, we didn't get the audience that we normally have, but I really appreciate it. And the replay, I'm sure, is going to be hugely successful because I know that like I said, we have 100 people that are registered for this, and the replay is widely watched. So we really appreciate that. If you're watching the replay, feel free to leave your questions or your comments, and I will make sure you get a hold of Ryan if I can't answer those, and you get that connection so that you can get all of those questions answered.
Happy to answer those.
Perfect. Thank you so much, and you guys have a wonderful evening. We'll see you next week for the last webinar in this series. We will be creating your 2021 marketing game plan. So we're excited for that, and we'll see you next Thursday at our regular time, 6 p.m. Right here on Zoom. So we'll see you. Have a great weekend.
All right, thank you. Later.
Bye-bye.